Let's start today with Diddy. Right before our taping, he was back in court for a pre-sentencing hearing. They had filed a motion essentially that said that the Mann Act was unconstitutional. It's a racist law. And, I was curious when I saw that because, it's a law that we're not that familiar with. And so I looked at it and it does look like it might be a racist law. It used to be called the White Slave Traffic Act of 1910, which I thought was kind of interesting. Apparently it was targeted interracial relationships and things like that. So I don't know, have you ever had a case, Dave, with the Mann Act or anything about this law?
Well, actually, I don't think that when I was state attorney, we had any Mann Act cases. I mean, in particular, because we're state prosecutors, not federal prosecutors. But I am familiar with the act, and that act is used a lot when it comes to sex trafficking these days. It's not your grandfather's Mann Act anymore. In fact, in 1986, there was an amendment to the act that replaced this immorality clause of it, which allowed it to be used and misused in all sorts of matters. And that's why people like Jack Johnson, the boxer, and musicians, and even Charlie Chaplin was implicated under the Mann Act. Because if you wanted to go after your political enemies, that was the broad act to do so. Not anymore. It's been limited. It's more specifically defined. And now you see it in sex trafficking cases as like a backstop. And it is used here to give the victims of Diddy some justice, even after he was acquitted of all the major charges.
Well, what do you think? You think that this is a strong argument, Matt? Do you think that they'll actually be able to get some type of a reversal on these few convictions that Diddy has?
No, I don't think they will.
I don't either.
But this is, people have to remember we have a separation of powers. And essentially, when you have a law, like Dave just pointed out, it's been updated multiple times. It's over 100 years old. Whatever the sources were, it's used a lot still, right or wrong. And it's not really a judge's job to bless it or not bless it. It's really, that's more a function of the appeals court, potentially. But I think the time to bring a motion saying that the elements don't fit were during the trial itself. They didn't. I think it's kind of waived. And I was kind of surprised today that we even saw the judge taken under submission. I don't see anything happening. I've been wrong before. I think the defense did a very good job during the trial itself on this. But I think they're going through the motions at this point. I'd be shocked if the judge actually granted this.
Yeah, I almost felt like this was a preview of the sentencing. We're trying to throw everything at sentencing to get as much leniency as possible. Let's throw these in right before, on the eve of sentencing, to sort of butter the judge up. If he's going to rule against us on these, maybe we'll rule for us on sentencing. So let's talk a little bit about sentencing. They filed, I think it was a 192-page sentencing motion. And this, this is common in federal court, filing these motions to say that, our side thinks that the guidelines show one thing and the other side thinks the guidelines show another. Looks like Diddy's lawyers are saying he should serve maybe 14 months, which means he'd be out right before Christmas, and the government's saying 5 years. What do you think is the strongest argument on each side? Dave, let's start with you.
Well, I do think that he will get more than what the defense is asking for, because the judge saw what we all saw, that there was violence here, that video of Diddy just manhandling Cassie cannot be ignored. And I do think the judge thinks, like most of us, that Diddy got away with one here. That I was shocked that he got away with sex trafficking when I thought the evidence was pretty clear. When it came to Cassie, maybe not as much with the others. And so I do think that the judge will give him more than the defense is requesting, but not as much as the prosecution, I think, who wants at least 4 years, 5 years. You mentioned that he can get up to 7 years and 3 months according to the sentencing guidelines because of his violence in this past, and also the role that drugs played in all this. So I think the best argument for the prosecution will be the violence that you cannot ignore because it's on video. People lie, video does not. And I think the best argument for the defense would be that these are just the least of the charges. These are prostitution charges, and they should not be used to put someone in prison as a makeup for the larger crimes that he was convicted of.
I know. I agree. What do you think, Matt? The best
well,
arguments
actually, I think that you and I, all three of us now, we've had those cases where you go in front of a judge and you make an argument, throw all the spaghetti on the wall and hope something sticks. has never been, I think, the best way to go because you lose so much credibility, and we see a lot of that actually in this motion. They talk about disparity in sentencing. That's something I think the judge is really going to pay attention to. It's what does the typical Mann Act violation entail? What are the typical sentences? Because you really have to, in federal court, you've got to justify any sort of departure from that from a legal perspective. And the judge would have to defend his decision on that. So I think that that's going to be very persuasive. Some of the other stuff in there is he doesn't like the food in jail. He has to sleep too close to other inmates. That is kind of, I was kind of surprised to read that, honestly, because they did such a good job in the trial. And they just, in my view, looked stupid. Sorry, including that. That's a boohoo thing. That comes off to me as a guy who, like Dave said, a lot of people see this as he dodged a bullet. But that sounds like a really privileged, wealthy guy who doesn't like the conditions of his confinement. And I see that going nowhere with the court. So disparity in sentencing, that's a really good issue for them. And I think Dave's exactly right. I think the court will somewhere along the way, he's going to split the baby between what the defense and what the prosecution is asking for. And my guess is Diddy's going to be out in about a year.
Yeah, Matt, I was looking at those conditions and I think they're atrocious, but I think most jail conditions are atrocious in this country. And I just couldn't help but think that that was a client-driven decision to put those in. We've all had those clients that are like, hey, you know what I've gone through? I want the world to know that. And I just caution them against it. But let's talk a little bit about those conditions. We've got the motion. Some of the things that they included was that he's on constant suicide watch. And, this has got to be difficult. I mean, every 2 hours, apparently they wake him up to make sure he's alive and well. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me why that's going on. His cell is illuminated for 24 hours a day. He's got limited access to clean water. I didn't really understand that. We're not in a third world country, but apparently he heats his own water before he's able to drink it so that he couldn't get sick. The sleeping arrangements, that's pretty typical. I mean, sleeping in a dorm style room with 2 other inmates with a bathroom, that didn't seem that crazy for incarceration to me. That he hadn't breathed fresh air in nearly 13 months nor felt the sunlight on his skin. Again, it's pretty typical. I mean, I don't think it's right, but it is pretty typical of the types of conditions. What I didn't know was that he's got some medical issues. They talked about he walks with a limp, doesn't have healthy food. Yeah, that's pretty fair. I don't know about you guys, but I know the Fulton County Jail, if you've probably seen the articles, I read this, it said expired processed pork, and all I could do was think of the odor of bologna sandwiches, which is what they feed for breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the Fulton County Jail. And it is literally the most vile smell. So, I definitely understand that. Said that his food could have maggots. I mean, do you think any of these arguments, Dave, are going to carry any weight with the judge, or think the judge is just going to say, why are you complaining about this stuff?
Yeah, the latter. I don't think that's his best argument. I was surprised about the maggots. I understand you sandwiches, and remember Donna Adelson said, hey, they're giving me all carbs. I'm putting on all this weight. I'm getting pasta with potatoes. Well, maggots in your expired pork? I don't know if I believe all that. Maybe he saw one or two. Is that a normal thing that they just eat their maggots? It sounds like some of these terrible movies from the 70s, like Escape from Alcatraz and stuff.
I know, it's pretty nasty. I don't think it's going to be that successful either. But if any of it's true, it is pretty disturbing. I mean, we are, we're not a third world country. We can do a little bit better than that. But I don't know that it's going to carry a lot of weight with the sentencing court. Another thing, though, that very curious what you think about his free game with Diddy. So one of the other things that he put in his sentencing memo is that he has launched a jailhouse course to teach fellow inmates business skills. Apparently, he did this to spread his knowledge of business with his fellow inmates. And I sort of think this could go both ways. I mean, we always like to show that our clients are trying to utilize their time for the betterment of society. But, what type of an impact did this have? What do you think, Matt? Do you think this is just a Hail Mary?
You know what I think? I think this is just an attempt to garner some sort of mitigation. And what does that mean? Is this a formal thing where the people are signing up and he's got an actual room, or is this him sitting at the friggin' lunch table in the day room, telling stories about his rise to fame, hoping that the guys aren't going to friggin' steal his food? Right. There's a lot of stuff in that motion that, frankly, I'm not believing Diddy on anything that he says. So there's a lot of that stuff that I think is, I think you hit the nail on the head, Ashley. This is client driven, and he's trying to talk to everybody, and that could be one other inmate who wants a job when he gets out. I don't think the judge is going to put any weight on any of that.
Right. And I don't either. And I don't think the judge is going to put a lot of weight on the mom's letter. I mean, it's sad, and I read these and we get them from clients all the time. Diddy's mom is 85 years old. She doesn't want to die with her son in custody. I get that. But, is that something that really differentiates this case from the next case or really is a factor in sentencing? I mean, it always breaks my heart to see these mom's letters. But let's talk about his new lawsuit. So he has been sued. This was interesting because this is a guy who testified, Deontay Nash, who actually testified at the trial. And testified he was his ex-stylist, said that he had been subjected to a nightmare of sexual, physical, psychological abuse, unreasonable demands, et cetera, et cetera. But when he testified at trial, he said that he did not ever consider suing. So what do you think, Matt, changed his mind on this?
I think, look, I don't know. I haven't read his lawsuit, but I think that there's a phenomenon, especially in the modern era, when you got somebody who's wealthy and one person steps up and tries to take some of their money. Seems like the piranhas really come out. And I did see, I remember when that guy testified. And, you'd think that would be the type of thing that would come up during the testimony. It didn't. So my gut instinct, again, I don't know. I don't want to pass any judgment on the merits of a lawsuit that I'm not involved in, but I kind of had to hold my nose a little bit on that. As much as what we saw from Diddy was awful and what he engaged in, he treated people horribly. I don't know. It's pretty late in the game, and I'm skeptical about that one.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I thought it was a pretty late in the game. What about you, Dave?
I think it's probably lawyer driven. I actually do believe when he testified, he believed in his mind that no, he wasn't going to sue. And then I think afterwards, some lawyers got to him and said, you can make a lot of money on this. Look how much money others are making and others are filing lawsuits. I mean, and I know I should be more cynical about it, but I actually do believe that there are people who go into this thinking, I really don't want to be here. I'm under a subpoena. I want this to be over. And then they see all these other people who have stepped forward and it emboldens them. And so, I don't think he was lying. I think that he was just convinced otherwise by people afterwards, and best of luck to him.